All right. You ready to do it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, John Boyle. John, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Guy.
You're welcome. So John was born into a multi-generational family of coal miners and was raised in the small Appalachian town of Kingwood, West Virginia. He's a graduate of the Harvard Business School in Cambridge, Mass. From the ages of 13 to 40, John worked in almost every capacity of his family's business, including 10 years as the company's president. As a civil engineer, he's constructed thousands of public infrastructure projects, energy projects, and natural gas facilities across 10 states up and down the East Coast. John is the author of Appalachian Kid, How Hope Changed Everything, a book about the importance of kindness and mentorship, overcoming adversity and addiction, finding faith and hope, and helping those in need. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So before we get going here, this is where I usually ask people to share where they're from originally and where they are currently. But obviously, in the bio it says you're from West Virginia. Where are you currently?
I currently live in Charleston, South Carolina. I've
Okay.
been here about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's dive in here. Really interesting story. How did this start for you? And when I say this, interpret that as you like.
Okay. Well, this really started for me as a child. My earliest memories, Guy, I have been plagued with something that I didn't know what it was. And from my earliest memories, I knew something wasn't right. And so this started there. I grew up in a house that had violence. That violence was the norm. And as a child, it was overwhelming. And so as I grew, I had great difficulty in school. And it was interpreted as laziness. It was interpreted as I was goofing off. It was interpreted that I didn't care. So really growing up, I had a chip on my shoulder. And as I grew into a young man, my symptoms became more pronounced. Again, I didn't know how to explain them. I didn't know what the root cause was. I didn't know what to do about it.
And
And
excuse me, let me
so,
just interject. Excuse
yeah,
me. So this root cause, you're referring to the violence in the house, dealing with that, the
yes,
trauma of that. Okay.
yes. And so, you know, I only had one experience growing up, and it really wasn't until I had my own children in my 30s that I began to decipher and interpret my own childhood in a different light, in a different lens. So, in adulthood, in college, and through 36, 37 years old, I used alcohol to cover up those symptoms and to help me function. And it helped. I did well in my career. I succeeded. But all along, there was this parallel other half of the coin, if you will, that gave me extreme difficulty, primarily when no one was around. After work, when I was at home, in the evenings when I was trying to rest or sleep, in my personal life on the weekends. And so as I addressed my addiction to alcohol at 36 or 37, I learned I had PTSD. And then I could start reading books and learning about my disorder and finding ways to overcome the adversity I faced. You know, when you can define the problem, it's a lot easier to solve it.
So up until that point,
Yeah.
had you ever thought to yourself, what the hell is going on here?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe something happened. Did you ever look back to your childhood and say, yeah, that violence just, effed me up? Or how did you deal with it prior to 36?
Well, a number of different ways. At 26, I believe, I sought out my family physician first, and I said, look, I have these things going on. And primarily I was going in, and I believe a therapist would call it a disguise presentation. It's not that I was purposefully disguising it. I was going in, Guy, and I was saying, well, I'm having extreme difficulty sleeping. And really, I've dealt with that from high school on. I would go in and say, well, I'm really stressed, or I seem to be anxious, right? And my doctor, at first my family physician, and then I would go see specialists. We never really had that discussion that unpacked the full experience of my life. And
Hmm.
so I was misdiagnosed for about 10 years. I was put on different medications, be it for insomnia, then an SSRI. This it just dulled me. It didn't really address what was going on. So, um, my wife, I was married at for the first time at 29. My wife felt that there was something wrong with me. And to answer your question, Guy, in a long, drawn out way, um, there were all these precursors that make sense now. When my wife would come behind me and give me a kiss or a hug and I couldn't see it, I would flinch, right? And it makes so much sense now to say, yeah, that's a root cause of my
Hmm.
childhood. But then I just didn't think they were related. I just thought I was a jumpy person.
Right,
I didn't know anybody that had PTSD. The only people I thought who got it were soldiers.
right, right. Totally understandable. And in terms of being misdiagnosed, sad, unfortunate, but not surprising. I mean, it happens to so
It's
many
very
people.
common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what shifts for you such that you're like, okay, I need to get this drinking under control. I need to, you know, really find out what the hell is going on
Yeah.
and begin treatment and healing.
What shifted for me, Guy? So I was the CEO of my family's business, and it was uh, for West Virginia. It was rather large. We had 500 or 600 employees, and the weight of that was consuming. And that, coupled with my disorder, I started having health problems, and um, I was as white as my shirt was. And I went into my doctor and I said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't feel well. And so, um,
And you were drinking during
basically,
this time
during this
a lot.
time, and 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 so I had some blood work done, and I was malnourished. I was vitamin deficient, and my liver wasn't functioning properly. And so my doctor explained to me that if I continued along this path, it wasn't going to be a good ending, and it might be soon. And so I started trying to quit on my own, and I couldn't. Like, Guy, not even close.
Hmm.
And what really changed and gave me momentum, I was in a bar one night, and it was after midnight, and I was with a few friends, and I was many drinks deep. And, I started talking to one of my friends, and my friend invited me to church. And from that point forward, Guy, I started, it wasn't like the snap of a finger or a lightning bolt out of the sky, but I started to gain purpose. I started to realize that life for me was about more than how I was living it at the time.
Hmm.
And so, over time, really a few months, I gained the internal fortitude to, walk into the office and say, hey, I need to go to rehab. And running a company of that size in a family business, uh, that wasn't a fun day to go in
Oh,
and
man, I can
tell
imagine.
my management team and my employees, but hey, I'm not going to lie about it. I've got to
Right.
address it. I've got to face it. You know,
Did they have an idea that something was going on? Was something was troubling you? Was wrong with you?
um,
That you were drinking a lot?
I think many of them suspected I was drinking a lot towards the end, the last couple of months before I quit. I was missing work. That was something that I didn't do. That was very out of character for me. And it became apparent. I had some siblings that worked in the business at the time, and they could see that quicker than maybe some of my uh, coworkers. So they pointed it out, and they did help me uh, come to the realization that I couldn't do it on my own.
As a reminder, we're speaking with John Boyle. The book is called Appalachian Kid: How Hope Changed Everything. So just as a kind of an aside here, before we get to the book, at what point on the continuum here of this journey did you go to Harvard Business School
So after I got sober,
after you got sober?
I've been sober 10 years, and um, I I'm a graduate engineer, and I always wanted, a business background and a business education, but I didn't realize until I went to rehab that my business would function with me gone. And so once I got help and got sober, I really focused on trying to better myself and do the things that I really couldn't do in my 20s and early 30s. And so, I tried to make my dreams a reality, and I strove for the hardest place I could apply to, and I applied and got in. And I was shocked when that happened, to be honest with you. And so was everybody who knew me. Not that I was a terrible student, but I wasn't a straight A student by any means. By any means.
Well, pretty amazing accomplishment. Um, how did the book come about?
So originally, the book came about. It began, or I started to hear people tell me you should write a book when I was at Harvard. Um, the program was called Owners and Presidents Management, and in that you have different subjects like leadership and controls and governance and finance and those kind of classes. And one of the classes I took was a family business class by a gentleman by the name of John Davis. John Davis is now at MIT, but at the time he was at Harvard. And John, in our first family business class, started talking about why family businesses fail, or why the majority of family businesses fail when they go from first to second generation, second to third, and so on. And I felt that some of John's maybe not assumptions, but his experience were a bit skewed. So I raised my hand and I started talking about my experience. And when you grow up in a home like I did, and then you work in the family business, you're triggered all the time, right? It's difficult. So I shared my experience with my class, and it monopolized it for an hour and a half. And when I got out of that class, I had a few classmates who were friends of mine who just emphatically said, "You've got to write this book." And one of them, Dr. Thomas Wigelman from Munich, Germany, would not let it go. And so over
Well, hold
time,
on here. So,
yeah.
what did you take uh, concern with that John Davis was saying? You raise your hand. What caused that?
Well, so John Davis was talking about in specifically why second and third generation family business members tend to not have the success that a founder does, right? And so you're going back to 2017 or 18, Guy, and I don't remember the whole class per se, but much of it kind of centered around the founder, or the person in the position of power in the older generation, kind of being this individual who has it all together, has a well thought out purpose and strategy, and is passing a well-oiled machine down to the next generation. And that it isn't always the case. I'm not finding fault with anybody who came before me in my family, but there was a lot of divisiveness, and there was a lot of dysfunction within our family business, and really within any family business. And that is not really talked about. And the
Mm.
reason it's not talked about is, it's hard for those family members to hear. It's hard to say. And you're afraid, if you come out and you speak the truth, that you're not going to be invited to Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, right?
Right.
So it's a really weird environment when you're navigating a business and a family.
What
And
gave
that's
you
what I
the
tried to get across to John.
what gave you the courage to do that? To raise your hand and kind of speak the truth, in a sense, your truth.
Well, no one really knew me at Harvard. I'm from West Virginia, and I've got these classmates from all over the world, and I just felt like I should raise my hand and just tell my experience. I didn't think it would monopolize class. I didn't think it would end up being a book. And I certainly didn't think I'd be here talking to you about it, Guy.
So let's kind of dial in on the book. Specifically, what did you want to do with the book? What did you want to write? What did you write?
So first, I wanted to help people. Guy, when I learned I had PTSD and I got sober, I tried to buy every book I could on the subject. And there's some good books out there, but there aren't a plethora of books. And so I had a hard time really reading these books and connecting the dots to how it relates to a guy like me. And so I felt like because the disorder is misdiagnosed often and there's difficulties with disguised presentations and everything else, I felt that if I wrote a memoir about my life and I talked about the symptoms I had at the different ages and what difficulties I was dealing with, that it might help someone who hasn't been diagnosed read it and say, wow, I have this too. Right. And so that was really my purpose of writing it. I'm sorry, I forget the other question you asked me.
Well, no, it was just, what did you write? What did you want to write? What was the impetus for the book?
Yeah. So what I wanted to write was I wanted to write a book that helped people, but it also told my journey and how I ended up telling my story. Um, a friend of mine has a charity called Building Hope, and it's centered in West Virginia. He's a fellow businessman. His name's Mark Urso, and he's been so successful that he received the FBI Director's Award for an outstanding charity. I forget the exact term
Well,
of the award, but it's well recognized, and it's a program that replaces bullying with empathy. It teaches empathy and understanding your fellow students' plight, right? Understanding where they're coming from so that you're not piling on and you're being understanding and empathetic and not hurtful. So I volunteered at my hometown high school and did this program with freshmen back in 2018. And when I was driving up to my hometown from where I lived in Morgantown, um, I thought it was going to go one way. And so I spent the day with these freshmen, and it changed the lenses that I saw in my own life. And coming home, I looked at my life in a completely different perspective. It was really the first time I had interacted with young people who had, three of the four in my breakout group that I believe had the same disorder I did, at least displayed some of the similar symptoms. The area in West Virginia I'm from, Guy, is it's impoverished. It's hit hard, and it's not very hopeful. And there isn't a lot of employment options there. It's quite sad what my
mm.
community has devolved to. So really, I wrote about my disorder in how I shared it with these freshmen that day. And I tell
This
how my life changed.
that sounds like a really powerful experience. What can you take us there a little bit further? I mean, what did you see when you were talking to these kids? How did it sh shift your lens in a sense?
Okay, yeah. So, um, so I'm in a breakout session with four 13-year-old freshmen in my hometown high school, and we start talking about how we grew up. And really, at first, I didn't talk about myself. I was just a moderator, a facilitator. And so, as these kids told their stories, each one was different, but three of the four, one of them was a kid whose stepfather just, was very abusive. And, he witnessed his mom just being, um, the victim of violence from her husband, his
Mm,
stepfather. The next one up, um, was unfortunately a father again. And the third was a set of parents. It wasn't violence on this one, it was more substance abuse. And the
mhm.
parents were incarcerated, right? And the grandparents were taking care of this young lady. And, just as they told their story, a guy at one point, I had to excuse myself from my small group. I went out into the concourse. I went in the men's bathroom and I found the first stall and I punched it as hard as I could.
Oh man.
It angered me to no end to hear of children being mistreated. And so I'm honest in this, right? This is something that we don't talk about much as a society.
Right.
It's not. It's something you talk about when you're a victim of it, or your experience has been violence, or childhood mistreatment or abuse, and you're trying to, you free yourself from the talons of it. This is not something that just is brought up at a dinner table. At least that's not been my experience, right? So when I'm there and when I'm in a circle with these high school kids, um, I can't get away from it. And it's like, well, at a certain point in that day, my brain switched to from myself and how it was triggering to me to how do I make a difference? What do I share about my story that can make a difference with these young people? And in the afternoon session, I absolutely had an opportunity to do that. And it makes for a wonderful story. And it's a
And
story of,
and is that what's in the book?
yes, sir,
Wow.
memoir along with there's 12 chapters in the book. Chapter 11 is the longest chapter by far. And that is most of my interaction with these high school students and me sharing my story with them in a way that it was, it added value to their lives.
To what degree, John, um, were you scared, quite frankly, to stand up and say, I have PTSD, or I'm a man dealing with this?
Mm-hmm.
We often hear through our culture and society that it's hard for men to stand up and say, I've been the experience of this, I've been a victim. What's your experience been like that?
My experience has been, Guy, that I have been very hesitant and been very hesitant to speak about it to anyone for years. Even my close friends, my very close friends. Um, I've been honest to my spouse. I've been remarried for 5 years or so. Um, I've been forthcoming with a few close friends, but really, other than that, until I started writing the book, Guy, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to tell my family. I didn't want to tell my business partners
What
because I
about your
believe,
siblings?
no, no, not really. After the book, I told them that I wrote it and told them that I had this, and I let them see it before I published it. My fear has always been for my professional life and the way that I feed my family. Um, I've worried before it's published. Obviously, I came to terms with it, or I wouldn't have published it. I worried a good bit before it was published that I would be seen as someone who's crazy, and it's just not the case. When you look at some of the best books out there, I think the Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is a really good book, and he's got a quote in there that says that um, unlike other forms of psychological disorders, the key component in trauma is reality. I just simply have a different experience in my childhood than other people do. And that's the difference, right? But it took me a long time to come to that realization.
I'm keep going back to that image of you with those high school kids and hearing their story and sharing your own. I mean, it just seems like such a powerful image. Um, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that those kids had that space to share what they did,
Yeah.
right? Because this is, as you said so astutely, we don't talk about this. So, were you said when you were growing up, that was normal for
It
you, that
was.
that type of violence.
It
Was it
was.
something that many people in that environment in your surrounding, in your neighborhood, was that just the way it was? Was this specific to your home?
Um, I would say it's common in my community. I don't know that it's common to be talked about. Um, it's something that happens behind closed doors, right? And one of the things about it is, it may not start um, as being a scenario where it's a parent and a child and it's devolving to violence. Sometimes it can just be a family argument and you're just shrapnel, right?
Mm.
Um, I experienced it on a regular basis. On a regular basis. My holidays were that way. Our vacations were that day, or were that way. This is something that occurred all the time. Maybe not every day, but certainly every month and probably every week.
Hmm.
So, at a certain point, at a certain age, it became overwhelming, and my health devolved considerably.
Can you talk about a few of the things that you've done that's helped you heal?
Hmm. Yes. There have been a few things that have helped me heal. For one, quitting alcohol, having no substance abuse, um, ways to numb or use as a crutch. Uh, the second thing that I found that was helpful was EMDR. And I forget exactly what the acronym stands for, but it was quite helpful in helping me sleep. The third thing, and probably not probably, by far the most impactful, was becoming spiritual, having a faith life, um, finding a way to offload what happened and hit a reset button
Mm.
and trying to move forward, um, and have that not be your identity. Even though, Guy, that you're triggered daily. I am
Mm.
triggered every day. There's not one day of the week, not one month of the year that I'm not dealing with this disorder. It is that consuming.
So as we kind of wind down here, who would you say the book is for?
Well, I tried to write the book for a myriad of people. I tried to write it for the person in the driver's seat who's like me. I also tried to write it for the people around that person in the driver's seat so they could understand. And third, I wrote the book to give people hope, that these stories don't have to end in prison sentence. They don't have to end in a grave, right? They don't have to end in dysfunction and passing your abuse on down the line. Um, there can be a happy ending. It's not that every facet of my life is happy, Guy, but there are many parts of my life that have improved by addressing and moving forward despite what's wrong with me, right? So I believe that story um, lends a great opportunity for people to listen to it, to read it, and to, I don't know if they'll be inspired by it, but they'll certainly see the fruits of overcoming adversity and having resilience in the face of something that's awful.
That
And
sounds pretty
whatever they
damn
face,
inspiring to me.
yeah, whatever they face, I just want them to to know what worked for me, and whether they apply it to themselves or not, at least they know that that option is there, right?
Those kids, were they boys that you were talking to in that group?
Two boys, two girls.
Two boys, two girls.
Two boys, two
Uh,
girls.
what did you want to give them? What did you want to infuse into that group when you were talking to them?
Mm, that's a really good question. My first answer is hope, right? But peeling back the layers a bit, one of the things that one of the boys told me in an early morning session, or the early morning session, was that God's not real, that he plays favorites, right? And Guy, that is something that I grew up Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore. But that is something that I believed as a young man. And um, you feel like an outsider looking in almost, that you're not good enough, right? And so what I shared with these young people and what I share in my book is that, that God is real and he does love you. And there is hope. And I explain the differences of hope and how our world sees it and how faith sees it. And I hope their takeaway was they knew the difference, that there is hope, that you can rise above adversity and be something and not be defined by what happened to you.
That's awesome. Perfect way to stop here. John, what is the best way for people to reach out, learn more about you and what you're doing?
Okay, so the best way to learn more about me is to go to my website. It is AppalachianKid.com. And there's a link to Amazon to buy my book. I have an audiobook coming out. You can buy it paper copy or hardback. I have an audiobook coming out in a few weeks. If there's also a link there to my my email, and that's john@appalachiankid.com.
Okay. We'll have all those linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. John, come on, man. So inspiring. My gosh, love to have you back at a later date.
Yeah.
But really appreciate you doing it. I mean, just come on, courage, the
Yes.
fight. Jesus, amazing.
Yes. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
I've had so many inspiring emails from people and just feedback, of just how it moved them. Or, I had I had a guy who's a Marine, U.S. Marine and a veteran, and he gave it to his two boys. And he just told them, this is a once in a lifetime book.
Wow.
There's a lot of good life lessons in this, and you boys need to read it, and don't throw it away. Don't give it away. You guys
Right.
keep it, right? Other other examples, people have reached out and just said, hey, thank you for telling your story. I can't tell mine, but I'm glad you told yours. Thanks for standing up for us, right?
Wow.
I just want to help people, Guy. That's all I'm interested in. I wrote a book to help people, and I just wanted to get out there and just share my story.
Well,
thank you for helping me do that.
Well, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to getting this out there.
Yeah.
All right, sir. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, Guy.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.